Welcome back. Welcome to another episode of Nain's Shorts here in the den of the Wandering Ronin. Yeah, I know it's an oxymoron, but it's fun to say. And today I want to talk about something that actually came up via a skit, a comedy skit that was shared with me today. And it was this conversation about the math that we learn in school and how useful it actually is and whether or not we're ever going to use it in real life. And the skit takes a turn. There's an emergency and somebody has to call 911. And the 911 operator asks them, if I have one ambulance on this street and is this far away, and I have another ambulance on this street and it's this far away, which ambulance is going to get to you first? And it's pretty funny to think about, but it spawned an idea. And the idea is, in our schools, what we teach our students in martial arts, is it useful for self-defense? Like any particular lesson that we give them on any particular time. And the thing about it is that in my head, I have various points of views in reference to this. For one, from a more traditional standpoint, I see the necessity of building somebody's physicality up. They can't throw a punch worth anything. Well, then teaching them how to throw a proper punch or proper kick is definitely something that you need, and that takes repetition. Would they be able to use those punches or kicks in a useful way in a self-defense situation right away? Probably not, because again, they're not well trained enough and they don't have that control yet. So I see how you would need to build that up first before you can start teaching them the concepts and ideas of how to use them in a real fight. So there's a lot to be said about the progression of growth when it comes to a particular student. But then again, that's a student that hasn't had any experience, that's never thrown a punch or a kick, and doesn't really understand how to go about doing so. But is that all students? Some students are just naturally athletic and have that ability to imitate and throw a kick right away with minimal instructions. So then in that particular instance, when you have a student that is gifted athletically or just has other experience or is just older and has been in actual fights and is now just trying to learn how to do it better or minimize the amount of damage that they take during a fight, do you hold that student back because the curriculum says that you're supposed to follow this particular guideline or these steps to get to a certain point? Then on the flip side of that, you have these concepts and ideas that some people teach, like us in the Bladed Mind Ronin. We teach concepts and ideas more so than anything else. We want to get the understanding, the tail end of things. Once, say, a student has reached a certain level, then we start getting into the minutia of things. We start telling them how this isn't set that you use all the time. You might use a piece of one, a piece of another. You have to adapt to the situation because you cannot train for every possible scenario. And all of a sudden, they're creating their own ways of doing things. They're breaking things up, techniques and movements to fit their needs for that particular situation. Or maybe when they're training, they just come up with something. You're like, oh man, that was really cool. What was the thought process behind that? And it boils down to that understanding. We've talked about this before, how when a new student starts to an advanced student, they're doing the same things, except the advanced student just understands it better. And at the same time, we could argue because they've been doing it longer, they just do it better because they've done the move hundreds and thousands of times, so it looks cleaner and crisper. But to be able to actually use it outside of that realm, it takes understanding. It takes the ability to know what this was intended for and then change the intention if needed for that particular situation. That's adaptability. And are we doing our students a disservice not giving them this information up front. Letting them know what it is, what it's meant to be, what it should become for them. Because again, they're going to use it differently than you are. They're the ones that are going to be in that situation, not you, not your school, not your system, them as individuals. So, are we holding back some of our students following the traditional way of teaching? Or are we truly building them up for success? But how long does that take? And in the meantime, if they find themselves in a situation where they need to use it but can't, are we the ones to blame for not having given them that, oh, hey, by the way, this works great in class. This works really well in sparring. But in a real fight, there's a few things that have to change. And if we don't say that, are we to blame for that? Are we to blame for their failure in that particular instance? I don't know. I can't give you an answer to that. This is really something that I'm opening up for the rest of you to contribute your own thoughts and ideas, because it is something to consider. As an instructor, especially self-defense instructor, you want your students to succeed. And what is the best success? Being able to survive a violent attack. Not necessarily win, but go home at the end of the day with the least amount of injuries humanly possible in that situation. And oftentimes it boils down to the character that you build through your school. Are they the kind of people that are going to antagonize somebody who's giving them a hard time? Are they going to say something sarcastic that's going to piss off the person in front of them to the point where they do get into a fight? Or are they the kind of person that's going to swallow their pride, apologize, and move away from that situation? Personally, I feel that would eliminate a lot of the possibilities of getting into that fight, is being able to recognize your own emotions at that time, lower them, taking a deep breath, and calmly removing yourself from that particular situation. Will that always work? No, which means you have to have the physical stuff to go about protecting yourself. And I do emphasize the word protecting, because again, sparring, it's an even match. You're essentially fighting because you're testing things out, you're giving each other different looks, and you're learning from one another. A fight isn't that nice. A fight is somebody trying to hurt you for whatever reason they find or justify doing so. And it's you either going to get beat up and hurt, or you're going to get out of that situation whichever way you can. We can't say what it's going to be. We can't say if you're ever going to be in that situation, but we train for the worst case scenario. I like to believe that that's what martial arts is. And depending on how we focus that training, it could be, I'm just teaching an art. I'm just keeping this alive. This is more of a meditative thing, and that's great. And as long as that is what presented and that is what is taught, I have no problem with that. The problem arises when that is the scope of the teachings presented as a form of self-defense. Because then it is very obvious that there are a few things lacking, particularly the applicable side of things. The art, beautiful. Are there great things within many arts that could be applicable in a real fight? Yes. Just recently I had a class with a student in Kaju Kempo. Asked him what he was going through. I hadn't trained with him for a while. I took over his class and we went through the details. What is this move truly intended for? It's a series of movements back to back to back that make that technique, but what is each individual movement for? First, breaking that down, understanding why you're doing that to begin with, what is the intended purpose for it, and then letting them know that you can change that purpose as needed. The movement might still be the same, but what you do with it changes depending on where you are and what you are trying to do. And that lit up his mind, and all of a sudden he started making all these connections, not just with the techniques, but also his opinions of what those movements were for and how he can bring other lessons that he's had into the fold to make that one thing work even better for him, his height, his body type, and his mobility. Because again, at the end of the day, if we're not teaching the individual students, then sure, some of them will succeed because it works with their body type. Some may not. We've talked about this before. Why so many people end up quitting martial arts? Because they keep on doing something and repeating something, but not understanding the purpose behind it, not understanding or seeing the growth, and therefore they get bored. They lose interest. They don't know why they keep doing the same thing over and over again. And maybe that's how the class is designed. You have to stay in there long enough for the mental fortitude to finally say, okay, what the hell is all this about? And then they start teaching you. But for us, in our class, we like to give all that at the beginning. Now, does that mean that the students are going to retain all that information? No, not at all. We come back to it and all of a sudden their light bulbs go on, like, oh, that's what that lesson was really for, is so it can become this. And that's what we want. The reason why we don't hammer it so hard that it's ingrained in their head is because it's going to be ingrained based on how we understand it, not how they understand it. We present the information up front and we put it as simply as we possibly can, but the development part, that's on the student to take care of. More so because if it comes from them, it solidifies as something true, something real. Sure, they can have all the respect in their teacher that they want and take whatever they say as gospel truth, but we've seen that backfire in the past as well. And we don't want them to imitate us, and we don't want them to take our word as the be-all, because we want them to think for themselves. Again, in that situation, that's all they're going to have. So if it comes from them, if they develop it themselves, then it becomes something useful for them to adapt when they need it, at the moment that they need it. The physical development part, that takes time, regardless of what system that you do. So yes, we have that as well, and we do repeat things over and over again. The difference is that we hash out different content from the same movements based on ideas and concepts. And we just start layering. So they do very basic things. For example, our exercises that we do, it's just wrist exercises. And that's how we present it. It's just simple wrist exercises that we're going to loosen up our wrists and all these other things, and we add other movements to it, and that's all it is. An exercise. They understand it is one of the very first things that we teach. But for those of you who do Filipino martial arts, you know what this motion actually represents, and you know how much power you can drive using this motion. The students are learning all this, and it's being presented to them up front as an exercise, as a stretching exercise, but as it develops, as their minds understand more and more, all of a sudden they're throwing boutiques randomly without actually having to have a specific class to teach them boutiques. And that's from the very first time. This is a great wrist exercise. It really is. It's a great stretch. But it doesn't convey what it can become later on or how then you can use that flexibility. Conversely, this same movement can be used without a stick. And you see it in multiple martial arts. Inward block, outward block, upward block. The motion is the same, and understanding this motion, getting into the minutia of things, when all of a sudden you're creating impact. You're a lot stronger without actually using muscle or extra added force. It is the mechanics behind it, and that's how we teach. We teach the mechanics of things, because once they understand the mechanics, they can use them whichever way they need to based on their knowledge, their experience. Now, does that mean that a student, a first day of class, doing these exercises and can all of a sudden protect themselves? No, probably not. But we tell them that. We tell them up front, look, This is an exercise. It becomes something else later on, and we're going to give you a glimpse of that right now. And maybe if you happen to find yourself in a situation leaving class and you happen to have your sticks, it might be useful to you, but at the end of the day, it's going to be your mind that's going to keep you safe more than anything. Being able to get over that fear, being able to actually do something when your heart is racing a million miles a minute. That's going to probably keep you safer than any of the things that we show you physically. But we geared them for that mentally, so they start developing things on their own. Is that the best way to do it? I don't know. It's the way that we found seems to work for our students, and our students are a lot individualized. We don't have a large class, partially on purpose, and the other part is because this is a different way of teaching people. Teaching individuals, I've been told, is a great way to teach by a very prominent FMA celebrity and martial artist. However, it is not profitable, he said. And we get that. We understand where we live and the time that we live. You have to make a profit to keep the doors open, especially if you have a brick and mortar school, especially if you have bills and all these other things that go along with it, and this is your primary form of monetary gain. Then yes, I understand the process. I understand what is needed to keep the school alive. Currently, that's what I'm debating in my head. How much of the traditional way of doing things, how much of the Bladed Mind Ronin should I do? If I focus solely on the way that I teach Bladed Mind Ronin, I would never be able to open a school. And at this point, I don't know if I want to, at least not at this point, but one day I would love to have a brick and mortar school where I can bring classes in and teach, hold seminars. That would be amazing for me. I would love to do that one day, but it would not be sustainable the way that I teach the Bladed Mind right now. Would it be sustainable the way that Kaju Kempo is taught? Probably. Maybe. I don't know, because even my Kaju Kempo teacher has changed a lot of things, has removed things that he felt didn't make a lot of sense. It was either repetitive or it did not translate well into application. And ultimately, that's what we're talking about. Are we teaching our students something that's applicable in a real fight? Or are we doing them a disservice by not even letting them know that that's a possibility and that we need to explore further on how to get to that point? Do we even know that what we're teaching isn't applicable in the real world, in a real fight? And I think that these are questions that we need to answer as instructors and figure out whether or not we can do better. All that information, all the stuff that I learned in Kaju Kempo is good stuff. Useful? Not necessarily the way that it's taught. But it is useful if we take the time to study it and turn it into something that is going to help us in a real fight. Not to mention, GM Bob has simplified things so much that, yeah, a lot of it actually could be used directly, but as individual pieces, not necessarily the entire punch art or the entire grab art. The little pieces in between, the individual moves, applied properly, incredibly useful, at least from my opinion. And I believe that he would agree. But again, how are we viewing this? How are we taking care of this? And can we do better? Add your comments, share. I would love to hear from you. But thank you very much for joining me on another one of Nain's Shorts. I hope it was entertaining. Until the next one, 3, 2, 1.